I did it again. I made up my own computer programming language, and I made it work. I say I made it again because I made a previous video where I did this for an application, where I actually made it as a command that executed my own language's code. You should check that out before you really continue too much on with this, because this is based on that. This is taking that to the next level. So, making up your own language, that's the easy part. It's two different ways to implement it at that point, because that's going to be the hard part, and there's an easy way out, and there's a hard way. The easy way is to write a library for your favorite existing programming language, and that can have all the tools that you're hoping to have easy access to, the stuff that you would write as your commands in your own language. You just have them as functions or other resources in your library, and you can import it or include it or whatever you do with your language, bring that library in and run it as a part of your own and use it in your everyday language that you use. That's the easy way. But we're not going to do the easy way today. We're going to do the hard way, which is to make up our own language from scratch, which we can see can have some advantages, and it can have some, well, it's a lot of work. It can be a real trouble. Now, my language that I made up is just 3 commands, and you can restructure how it is however you know how to parse a file. You can restructure how the language is supposed to be. You can add commands, whatever you choose to do. It's up to you, but you'll have the knowledge of what I did, and you can expand a lot on this. So yeah, I mean, we've got to, make up the language. We've got to write an engine for it, and in this case, I went crazy on this. I used PHP, and not just any PHP. PHP has several different interpreters, 2 main ones that we need to look at right now. One of them is the PHP CGI, which means Common Gateway Interface. That's the protocol which web servers call files for to execute them. PHP CGI is optimized for that and takes care of a lot of the automatics. PHP CLI for command line interface, it's not designed for that. It's designed for a console application, and it handles things on a whole different way. There are certain things we are going to be using the CLI version because I wanted to add that complication. I wanted to show how we can also work with, because some languages, they don't have a CGI interpreter. If you're dealing with Python, if you want to take what I made an idea of here and put that in Python or Perl or Ruby or whatever you choose, you'll have the ability to know what other things you need to worry about. So I went ahead and used the PHP CLI version because this is academic, and if it was a live item though, I would probably use C because it's fast and it's what they've used for, it's I think what they coded PHP in, what they coded Apache in. They've coded a lot of things in it. It's very fast. It's a good language to use. It's what I would use if I was doing this in a production environment. I would definitely use something compiled and something very fast, because if you're using it as a server-side language, many requests can happen to that at the same time, which means the faster it can process one, the less of a resource load you're going to run on that server. And then you've got to configure the server to make it recognize your interpreter is supposed to be used for those. And you've also got to give it permission to do that. So there's a few extra things. And with this case, yeah, we're dealing with Linux Debian with Apache server. So Apache oftentimes has just a single configuration file. But on Linux Debian distribution, they kind of stir it around all over the place like a wild animal with the configuration file. Except for they did it neatly. Once you learn what they did, it's actually a pretty good idea. But if you just go in there every so often, then it would be better off if you had a single configuration file you'd probably prefer. If you're dealing with a single configuration file, I'm going to be showing you how all these configuration files work and the code to what I did on my scripting engine and all of that. In fact, actually, let's start looking at that here. These are the steps you're going to have to go through to configure it. So if you are going to be working with this outside of Debian, instead of having to enable these configurations and all that, to enable the modules, you'll simply uncomment the or make sure that it's in there anyway to load these modules for Actions and CGI. But if you're running Debian, there are some commands that you'll just run, and for the configuration, you'll simply add it to the main configuration file, and you could do that on Debian as well, but it's just not the professional way on Debian. You're better off writing your own file, and then you can enable and disable your configuration. Anytime you change those configurations, if you change a configuration, you generally want to reload instead of restart, and then on this case though, we're actually going to restart the process because we're adding a module. So the steps to making this thing happen here, we are going to write the interpreter, and I'm going to show you what I did on that. That's a CGI program that it's going to be called by the server, and it's going to look at whatever file is trying to be sent to the browser, and it's going to do all the processing to turn our code, whatever we had in there, into something nice and pretty that can actually be interpreted by a browser, because my language won't look good in a browser, but it does look really good the way it comes out of my CGI program. So we're going to take a look at that, and it's not as good as it could be. I absolutely could make it better, and I'll discuss that a little bit more too. We also need to write a configuration file, and this will allow Apache to recognize it, to become a recognized language on my server. Once I've written the interpreter, that gives me what I need to be able to put into my configuration file. Then once I've written my configuration file, now once I start writing my configuration file as well, I need to be in as root, because I can't save to a directory that I don't have write permissions on that directory to save into. So open up as root to write your configuration file and to do all of these other commands on this screen, because if you're not root, these commands are not accessible to you, or else you don't have permission to execute them, and your configuration file won't save unless you have root privileges to save to that location. And that would be your etc directory, Apache folder. Within that directory folder, same thing. Folder is what they show on the GUI, and directory is technically what it's called. That's the difference. Anyway, and then you're going to look into conf available, and you're going to add your conf file, and you're going to just come up with whatever name you want to, preferably all one word, and it's good also probably if it's all lowercase, might help, and dot conf, just like I show on here on the screen. Charlie, Oscar, November, Foxtrot. Then once you've done that, once you've saved that, then you can enable that configuration. Once again, making sure you're as root, enter the name, enter the command, that is a2nconf. That's for Apache 2 enable confirmation. That's what that's abbreviated for. And space and the name of whatever you name that configuration file, but you don't enter the .conf after it, just the name before the dot. Press enter, and then you enable a2n mod space actions, a2n mod space CGI, and then service Apache 2 restart. And now your Apache server will be able to recognize your language. You will have your interpreter in place. The configuration will be there. It will be all updated. Your modules will be in place to support your configuration, to support all the actions that you're trying to do. So let's take a look at this a little bit deeper and see the configuration is the next step that I would like to take. So this is our configuration file that I wrote. I called mine my web language is what that's abbreviated as, MWL. So we first want to make sure that whatever directory you put your interpreter in has permission for Apache to work with it. If it doesn't have permission, then Apache's just not going to find it because it doesn't exist for Apache, and, well, problems. So it needs to be there, and it needs to have, particularly this permission is the most important one. The other setup stuff is kind of helpful too, but make sure that it is there, you have the right permissions to be able to access it, and that it has exec CGI permissions. Execute CGI, it's just exec CGI. Then we're going to come on down here and we are going to create a virtual directory. This is the way we do it in Apache. There's two ways to do it. If we just use the alias command, it would just be for like serving regular web pages out of. But when we use script alias, that tells it that this is a CGI directory to treat things in there as CGI programs, run them, and send the output. Don't just try and serve the whole source code. Or not really, it's not really source code. It's, well, in this case it's source code because I wrote it in PHP, but it'd be serving your binary and allowing them to download your binary. You know, but in this case we're supposed to run it and give them that result, and that's what we're doing here. This is telling it to do that, and then we're taking it to another step. There's a few more steps down here, but this really makes it so that this folder off your virtual root, wherever your home is for your website, if you go into a CGI-bin directory, sure, it might not exist on the physical file system at that location. You're not going to be going directly on into whatever folder might be there. It's not looking for that. Instead, it's going to be existing over here. So whatever's in this folder is actually what it's going to return. And it's inside this folder here, same as up here, that's why we gave it permissions, is going to be my interpreter, which is right here. And then I'll discuss these two here. So now that we've created a directory that has permissions to be used to execute CGIs and stuff like that in it, now we've created the virtual directory to be able to access that from the website. We're also going to make sure that it recognizes the file extension that I intend to use. Like PHP would be a .php, but in my case, I got my own file extension because I'm not PHP. I'm my own language. So I'm .mwl, which means my web language. My web language. So all .mwl files get this handle, which means wherever these guys are seen, wherever it sees this, it's going to handle them as a my-web-language handler. Now, what does that mean? That means whenever I come down here and I decide to add whatever I do with that handler, I can do other directives. And the directive that I'm doing here is the action directive, which is a part of the action module. That's why we had to add that. We're dealing with CGI execute, which is why we needed to add CGI. We've got action module, and that deals with the action directive. So both of those are very important for our tasking here. So the action for anything which has this handler that's supposed to be handled as a my web language is going to be this executable. And so now we're going to take a look and see what is the source code of that executable, because whatever MWL files are put in that, whatever MWL files are called by the server will be sent to this interpreter. So let's take a quick look here and see what we've got. So this is the MWL interpreter that I wrote. And you'll see, this is not user bin php-cgi, which is the CGI version. This is just the PHP, which means this is the CLI version. On Linux, that's your CLI version. On Windows, I think they use the -CLI for that. But on Linux, this is your CLI version. So that means I have some other things I need to take care of, which is part of the reason why everything's going to go into this output string. I'm not going to use echoes down here like I did on my last time. I'm going to take this output string, I'm going to start empty, and I am going to start packing that full of whatever I need to send. I'm just going to continue to append to it till I get to the bottom of the file, till I've processed whatever I'm going to process. I'm going to open up the file, but you'll notice the file name here is funky. We didn't get a argument from the command line because CGI doesn't work that way. When your program is called by a CGI interface, it's given a whole bunch of environment variables instead. Those environment variables contain things like the path to, and in this case, this is the path translated for the file system. That's where the actual file is on the file system, not the virtual path. Where do I actually find that file that they were trying to call? Which is what my program now needs to do. It needs to find out where is that file and interpret it to provide my output. It's going to open that up and it's going to read it, and I'm going through here until I'm to the end of my file, and I'm just going to look line by line. I'm getting my lines just like I did on the last time. There is an exception. This guy here, that comma 2, is that says I'm only going to get a maximum of 2 elements in my array, which means whatever is left over is added to my final element. So if I have 3 spaces, as I'm separating it by spaces, I'm packing whatever is a new line, whatever is the text of a new line, and splitting it by spaces to create an array. But it's only going to create a maximum of 2 elements, which means if I have, for example, P space this space whatever other text I want to come up with, that P is going to be the first element, and then I think it was this was my first word that I came up with, and the space and whatever else we were going to throw in there, that's all the second element. So it's just going to split the first one off at the first space, then everything else gets loaded on in there, and it preserves the spaces beyond that. So we'll see how that kind of works as we see the source code, and then we'll see the response, and I'll compare that and explain how that worked too, and how that worked in comparison with this as well. So, all right, we went ahead and make sure that there's at least one line, just like we did last time, and then we're checking to see which command this is. We have 3 commands. We have H, we have P, and we have R. H is for the header. It sets the title, and the title tag of an HTML file is set by whatever's in H. So it's going to be H on the line. In fact, actually, let me just show the demonstration here. So right here is the second element to the array, and that would be the first element. So this is your divider. That's the only divider, wherever it be. So this is going to be the title to your page. In fact, let's just take a look at it on here too. So just like all of our other files are on here, it just fits in with all the other ones. MWL, go right on in, and it shows up. So it sets the title, and it sets the header 1. And let's take a look and see what we're doing on that. So it takes the output string, and it's going to put in my doc type. It's going to do all that cool stuff for me, my doc type, and my and it does it neat too. If you take a look at my source code, Very neatly done. All the proper line drops to make this a neat little piece of source code as well. And I can go ahead and add to it. All I have to do is edit this file, and I can add CSS references or whatever I want to. But here I've added my title right in here, and head, body, opens up my body and starts the header 1, puts it back in again. So one entry for me, it did both entries it needed to do. I mean, this is faster than anything else you've probably worked with for doing a web page, right? And if you edited this and made it to where it really looked awesome, hey, it'd be really fast. All right, so we've got that. Yeah, so that's all done by all the way down to here. Actually, all the way down to the first line is all done by that first H. And then if it hits a P, then it checks to see, is it P? On each line, it's checking it as it goes through. It just goes through. Was it an H? No, it was. Okay. No, it was not a P. Well, actually, it says else. It doesn't even check beyond that. Then it comes back on into the next line. And no, it's not an H. Oh, it is a P. So what's it do? It puts all this in a nice paragraph. And I could make this aligned however I wanted to. If I wanted to make my own, tag-based language, I could use a bunch of just like XML tags or whatever. I mean, this thing could parse XML. It could parse from a database. It could do all kinds of stuff, which just, yeah, I think hopefully you're getting the idea about how this could just go endlessly. But endless opportunities here. But it just shoves that right into a paragraph. And now I'm going to shove it down here. And that's where we can see where it wrote both of my paragraphs are on here, because I have 2 paragraphs listed. Paragraph is here, paragraph is there, and we can see how it really did put them together as paragraphs. And it automatically closes off too. We'll discuss that too. It automatically creates the closing, so you don't even have to write the close of body or HTML on a page. Saves some time, but you could also use a library and call a brief function as well. Maybe even call it from a destructor of a main class or something, whatever you choose to do. But there are options that you can use on the library option as well. So, yeah, so we've got P. We've got R, which is just a horizontal rule, which we see that here. If it finds that, it's going to enter a horizontal rule and a line drops, which makes it nice and neat. And where does my end of document come from? Well, it automatically does that. It gets down here. Once it finally runs out of lines, it closes the file. And now it just automatically adds that. And now we need to add our headers. This is why we appended everything to a string. Everything had to be appended to a string because now we want to check. We want to say this is, yes, text HTML. Without a header, without at least a content type from a header, we've got nothing to work with. The server may return an error. If it does not return an error, the browser will most certainly return an error because I haven't met protocol specifications. My CGI application did not return what CGI was expected to return to the server. The server might just make up something and put it in there, but that's generally they just give you an error and say you didn't do the right job. And then I also like to add content length, which is part of the reason why I like it all as a string. Why I didn't put that at the start, because I had to figure out how long my content would be. And so now I find out the string length and I put that in here as content length header. Then I have my double line drop as required to end headers and proceed into the actual output file, and that's where I output my output string, all right here. Just shove that in there, and that is the only time I echo. That goes out, then I exit, and that allows for the server to return that page. I've now passed all this to the server. It can now pass it on to the browser, and the browser can then look at something like this, well, I did only that amount of work. At least in the future, any future use of this language would be this amount of work. Now, to create your first page, yeah, that was a lot of work. Thank you for watching.